Thanks for coming to our beautiful offices at 120 Park Avenue. I know this is a new venue, at least for me. Usually I'm at 731 Lexington. So welcome, and thanks for making it on this hot day. I'm Scarlet with Bloomberg Television. And of course, this is the latest edition of the Cornell Tech at Bloomberg Speaker Series, where every month we speak with leading figures in global technology. We're talking about entrepreneurs, investors, and thought leaders. And our goal, of course, is to bring you engaging conversations, to produce new insights and raise compelling questions, especially for those who are pursuing their own startups and looking to move on with exploring new ideas. If you want to catch up on our prior episodes, you can check out the Inside Bloomberg page on YouTube. So this month, we're joined by David Gandler. He is co-founder and CEO of Fubo TV.
Yes.
Now Fubo, right?
Correct.
Now just Fubo. Okay. If you're confused about how to watch live sports but avoid paying a hefty cable bill, join the club, A. B, David is ready to offer a solution, and we'll get into all of that. The backstory here, of course, is that streamers like Netflix and YouTube have disrupted the media landscape completely. They've led to millions of people cutting the cord and, of course, hastening the demise of the cable TV business model. It still exists, but it's just not quite what it was before. In an on-demand world, there's no more appointment viewing, except for live sports. And so, of course, advertisers are desperate to reach that audience. They are paying up for those ads, so that's why the Super Bowl ads cost so much money, why there's so much hoopla around it. And, of course, the cost to broadcast those live games only go up. They're already high. They keep going higher. Bloomberg is reporting, of course, the latest professional sports league that is negotiating its media rights is the NBA, and they're being finalized right now. They could cost $76 billion over 11 years, excuse me. It feels like 3 years. Also, of course, at the same time, billionaires and institutional investors, and sometimes these are the same people, are bidding up prices of pro sports franchises. Limited supply means ever higher prices, and you're seeing all of that spread beyond the 4 major sports leagues to MLS, to golf, to women's sports finally, and all of that. So the ripple effect is pretty huge. So we're gonna get into all of that with David here, but I wanted to start, as I always do, David, with a little bit of your background, because you went to BU, you studied economics. Were you one of those people who thought and knew all along that you're gonna be an entrepreneur and start your own company?
100%.
Really?
Yes.
What kind of small businesses did you run when you were a kid?
I looked at all kinds of ideas. My first startup was actually when I was 23 and decided to move to Russia.
That was a startup?
Yeah, it was the same time when Mail.ru or Yandex, you may know some of these larger companies, but you know, I didn't understand, you know, how to proceed. So I started a company. I actually started the first portal in Russia. But when things got tough, and I didn't see any results quickly enough, you know, after a year and a half or 2 years, and I gave up. So that was a huge lesson for me. You really have to stick it out. You know, you have to commit to your ideas, and because there's no tangible way for you to know if you're succeeding, you know, you start thinking, well, you know, there's nothing for me to nothing to show for, right? You're always looking for something out there that demonstrates to you that you were, you know, able to, you know, there's a milestone that you reach that tells you, you know what, I got to get to the next step.
Kind of like if you work in an investment bank, or if you're a management consultant, you know where you are. Yeah,
like you finish school, you know, okay, that's, you know, check the box. Now I'm going to get a job, and then you know, get a master's, and you go, oh, maybe I'm going to get, you know, a better salary, a higher salary, or a better job, and so it's very linear. And unfortunately, with startups, it's not linear at all. Mm-hmm. It's not very sexy either for those of you that have started your own businesses. You know, you have to deal with your internal demons because you're all alone, and it's tough. It's not easy, and you got to keep fighting.
What gave you the confidence to go to Russia and start a company? I mean, that's a pretty bold move.
It is.
Even for an econ major.
Yeah, yeah, that's true for sure. No, you know, for me it was very simple. I was always looking for large audiences, large markets, and when I left, it was '99. Mm-hmm. It was right after the Russian ruble crashed, and you know, I thought this is a huge market. My choices were Brazil, Russia, India, and China.
The BRIC countries.
The BRIC countries.
Did you speak any of those languages, by the way?
I took Italian and Russian in college.
Okay. So you could get by with your Russian?
Not really, but you know, I can tell you one thing, it was a huge lesson, and it prepared me very well for life. But again, you have to really stick it out, and it's all about process. Most people are very focused on outcomes. You know, I want to be Elon Musk, or I want to be successful. You know, if that's the way you think about it, chances are you're going to fail, because you need to start really focusing on, you know, what are the steps that I need to go through to actually achieve what I want to achieve. And the process for me is actually key. With Fubo, it was all about process, because I wanted to start a live streaming service for sports.
Wait,
So,
let's back up for a moment
Yeah.
here. How did you get to the point where you decided you want to start Fubo? What did you see in the marketplace that convinced you, now's a good time for me to take another chance and start my own company, even after what happened in Russia?
Yeah, so that was a complete disaster. Part of it was my fault, part of it was my investors. Again, I didn't understand the importance of choosing the right investors when you get into a venture like this.
Were these Russian investors or US investors?
It was US and Russian investors.
Okay.
But I don't think they had the patience either, right? Because these are countries at the time that were moving very quickly, and if they weren't seeing traction soon enough, you know, people start to get nervous, and you know, expectations are very high. But you know, for me, I've always been very passionate about media. So that's another thing. If you're not passionate about something and you just want to do it, that's not going to work. You really have to love what you're doing, because there's going to be more bad days than good days. And on the bad days, you still have to know that you know, like a journalist, you do it because you love it.
What did you love about media?
Everything. I just loved. My career, I've worked in. I like to say I probably sold video in more ways than probably anybody in the United States. And I say that with extreme confidence.
Explain what you mean by that.
So I worked in local television, a small station in San Antonio, on the Hispanic side for Telemundo, KVDA. For those of you wondering why there's a W or a K in front of call letters, it's because it's split by the Mississippi River. Don't ask me why, that's just a rule. And so I worked in local television Telemundo was part of General Electric at the time, and NBC. And then from there I went on to local cable.
And this was selling ads?
Selling ads and doing business development.
Okay.
And so I've always been, you know, I would say, if not the best salesperson, then definitely at the top. And so I had a chance to work in local television, local cable, digital, with Scripps Networks, which is now part of Warner Brothers Discovery. And then from there, I got bored. It was great. I still know everyone there. And I decided to actually join a startup that was called Drama Fever. If you're familiar.
What does it do?
Drama Fever was
Because the name doesn't say enough. The name is intriguing.
Yes, it's actually a great name for the time. Drama Fever was an SVOD service that aggregated Korean dramas. So we sold Korean dramas before.
You're ahead of your time.
Yes, always, always. We sold Korean dramas, but I think the interesting piece about it is we subtitled it in Spanish for Latinos.
Is there a big market?
There is.
Korean drama
Latinos
with
love
Spanish
K-dramas.
subtitles? Okay.
And so, you know, we sold it to Hulu, and I think we sold one or two at the time to Netflix, but that company was acquired by a few people. I think it was, anyway, it was Warner Brothers in the end.
Okay.
And so I've had a chance to kind of work throughout. At Drama Fever, I sort of built out all the advertising capabilities and helped sell the company. So, you know, when that happened, that was in, I want to say 2014. And so on, I think, maybe a week later, I decided that the last bastion was live television and sports.
And you are a sports fan, yes? You played sports in college?
I played soccer in college.
Okay.
Yes, Division I soccer. And I remember that I never got a chance to watch any games because people would always text me like, did you see the game? What
No, I was in
channel? Where did you
practice.
see it? You know? So, and I never got a chance to see any games. I said, well, shouldn't we just have a platform that streams all the sports that people can find in one place without any friction or fragmentation? By the way, we're still dealing with friction and fragmentation.
This was in 2017 when you posed this
No, this
question.
was in 2015 when we launched.
Okay.
So it was pretty quickly. I actually asked the founders of Drama Fever, I said, why don't we do this? And they said, are you crazy? Sports? Never. This is a big boys game, as they said at the time.
Did it feel like you were competing against ESPN?
Well, I actually went, I mean, this is how I think. I went to ESPN. At the time, Russell Wolf was executive vice president. It was right before, if you may remember, the World Cup in 2014. I think we had, there was an American goalkeeper, Tim Howard, was playing for a club called Everton in the English Premier League. And I thought, this is the right time to do this. And so I went to ESPN and I said, guys, could you license to me the World Cup? And they said, you're crazy.
Who are you? And you're crazy.
Yeah. So, but everyone told me no. Everyone told me it was impossible. And when I brought in my co-founder, who was also at Trauma Fever, he said, what are we going to do? I said, I don't know yet, but we're going to be in the sports business. And we thought we were going to start with radio, and then I tried, actually I started to license clips from Reuters and other news agencies.
Video clips.
Video clips, and then I had 2 engineers in Romania. One of them is still with us, actually. And they would put those clips into one feed. We created a linear feed, and we started that way. And so, again, this is what I'm saying. You have to continue to find a path forward.
So you couldn't do live broadcasts because those rights are spoken for. Someone paid a lot of money for those. So what you did was get clips of it. So it's kind of like Red Zone in a way?
So yes, we synthesized into one channel a bunch of clips. We put some very cheap graphics together that were static. So we had someone manually changing graphics. And then from there, I realized this wasn't going to work. So I actually flew to Liverpool and talked to Everton, because Tim Howard was there. And I said, what if I buy the rights and show tape-delayed games, and I'll create a nice show, 44 episodes. And they said, why would you do that? And I said, well, people want sports, and I want to give them sports. So we acquired 4 rights to that sort of series. We produced 44 episodes. And there was a channel in the United States that may still exist called Gold TV. Very small.
GOLD?
GOL-TV, yes.
Okay.
South American channel. And they had the German soccer league rights.
Oh, I get it. Goal, like G-O-A-L.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so what happened was, because TV was linear, you could only show one game at a time. So I said, look, I have this great show that I've just produced. I have $50,000. Why don't you give me 1 game a week? And that's how we started the business. And they gave me this
hustler.
1 game. Well, you have to, but that's the thing about starting a business. There's no business plan in the earliest of days. You have an idea, and then you need to figure out how to implement that idea and where sort of the opportunities lie.
So where did you get the funding for this as you were kind of, not making it up as you went along, but kind of making it up as you went along?
We were. The one thing I didn't make up was the fact that I was very comfortable acquiring subscribers, because I had already seen what you can do in other media outlets. And what we did with Korean dramas was just insane. I mean, as I said, we were selling it to Latinos subtitled in Spanish. And we had reached, I think about, I want to say 200,000 or 250,000 paying subscribers, which at the time, that was a big number. We were charging $9.99. And so, I just, basically told investors that this is sort of the timeline of how I was going to acquire rights. But again, even that didn't go accordingly. So I'll give you another example. So so I was raising seed rounds. Every week, it was what they call a SAFE. Basically, it's just a convertible note. I started at 8 million, then I went to 9 million, 11 million, until I got to my Series A. And when I did my Series A, I had already acquired the rights to Univision. So my concept was, look, I have these German soccer rights. And then I went to Univision, and I significantly overpaid at the time. I mean, they thought I was crazy. But in media, if you go back historically, everyone had overpaid to get into the business. And so
It's just the cost of doing business.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's an entry fee, right? And so, I think at the time I paid, on a per sub basis, probably 400 or 500% above market. And I also offered them $10 million that I didn't have.
And your investors were comfortable with this?
So here's the interesting thing. So I start raising my Series A, and I raised $4 million. And then after I did that, I went back to my new board, which is made up of 3 people, and I said, I have great news. We're going to have Mexican League Soccer. And they said, that's great. How did you do that? I said, well, it's not done yet, but we're going to get these rights and it's going to be great. And then they said, well, how much does it cost? And I said, 10 million. And the guy from Palo Alto, a very smart guy, calls me up and says, David, I don't understand the math. You said 10 million and you raised 4 million. And I said, don't worry, I will handle it. And so what I did was I went back and I basically gave them a minimum guarantee of $10 million. But the first year, I paid, I think it was like $500,000. And the second year was like $2 million. And so it was all backloaded, which gave me a chance to sort of build a business. So that was sort of one of the many attempts that I had to explain to people that I wasn't crazy.
And did you learn that through your experience in Russia?
Absolutely.
Okay. I mean, because that sounds like something that's a tried and true effort.
Yeah, well, because when you're in the U.S., everything is very straightforward, right? There are rules, there are laws, there's red lights. You don't run a red light. There, it's basically you do whatever you want, whenever you want, and whoever knows someone more important is always the one that wins whatever argument. So the rules that I learned there was how do you maintain control of a situation without actually having any control. And so you start to think about the way you sort of maintain relationships. So the relationship has to be like they need you for something and for a very long period of time. And I remember coming back and I had friends of mine that are still in investment banking that had just graduated Harvard and all these great schools.
That linear path you were talking about.
Yes, and when you come back to New York, I've been home for 6 or 7 months, and then I run into some of them, we go to a bar, and I'm surprised, they're like children. I'm 23, they're 23, but they were kids.
What do you mean by that?
Because I had already seen so many things. You have, when I got to Russia, Putin was prime minister. Actually, he wasn't. Yeltsin was president, and it was my second month in, and Putin became prime minister. And 3 months later, he was president. So I got in there pretty early, and you had people calling you saying, oh, I'm your new partner, not investor, partner. What do you mean? Well, I just talked to your investor, and he said I could take a spot. And no papers, no contracts. You're dealing with all kinds of, it's in every country is the same, I think, outside of sort of Western civilization. You're going to deal with lots of these issues that you really have to learn to negotiate.
On the fly.
On the fly. It's kind of like living in New York where your awareness, your sixth sense is really strong, and oh, this is dangerous, or don't walk here, or hold on to your purse, or it's that feeling, that sense that you develop over time. And so, what I learned, most important lesson in media is the contracts are thousands of pages, thousands. They don't mean anything. If you ask someone, what does this mean? They don't know. It's been there for 35 years, and they just keep adding more and more and more. And when you want to take something out, they want something more instead. So they don't know why it's in there, but it is. Like, have you ever noticed the 5-day rolling episodes on cable? Have you ever seen that?
No.
Well, for those of you who had cable, when you would go to the VOD section on channel 1400 or whatever it was, it would always give you the last 5 episodes. You would never get the full seasons. That's why we all started to, consider Netflix as our main source for on-demand programming. Again, why was that rule created? Ask someone. No one can explain to you why that rule is.
It's just the way it's always been done.
No, because they needed a way to sell to Netflix without getting the cable companies upset about it. So they created this new window of programming. So, but again, it's irrelevant today, but it's still in there. So slowly but surely, these changes start to come to play.
Okay, so you learned how to not make it up as you go along, but really roll with the punches at all levels.
Yeah, you have to adapt to adversity. You just have to. And this is for any startup. You cannot, like I said, it's not straightforward. It never will be. And the key for me was always to be flexible. If you have an idea and you think your idea is brilliant, guess what? You might be the only person that thinks your idea is brilliant. That's not enough. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, but people want this. And I said, people or person, you want this. Are you sure there's a market for it? So I always tried to maintain flexibility. And I'm not wedded to any ideas. And what you see actually in the transformation of the company is we've dropped content, we've added content, we've lost content, and we maintain that. We've been first to do lots of things. We added free channels, fast channels as we call them, free ad-supported TV, into a paid subscription. Again, a lot of it is flexibility and testing.
Okay, so it sounds like it's going to continue to evolve and continue to morph.
Yes.
What was Fubo when you first founded it? and what does it look like now? Let's start with what it was when you first started it. I mean, you convinced your drama fever friends to come in on this, and then
it was a tough negotiation. That's another thing for an entrepreneur. You have to motivate people to join you in your crazy crusade. I mean, that's what it is. You know, you come up with an idea, and everyone around you thinks it's a silly idea.
But you were selling it, and you believe in it.
Yeah, I was sitting there next to him. We had just sold the company. I said, "Do you like this logo? Do you like this name?" You know, "Oh, I don't like .tv." I said, "Well, how is someone going to know it's TV if it's not .tv?"
Right. So what was your original pitch for Fubo? Just so everyone knows.
I wanted it to be just a sports streaming platform. But over time, it was quite evident that that's not realistic. There's no such thing, and there never will be, a Netflix of sports. Because you have too many rights, and you know, everyone is trying to get a piece of the action. And the leagues have gotten really good at, you know, licensing them out and really sort of creating more value, you know, for the owners of these teams. So as you may have seen, Netflix recently acquired the Christmas game.
For the NFL.
Right.
2 games.
2 games, correct.
Even though they swore they would never go into sports.
Well, because they're flexible, right? They said they would never do ads. I remember Reed Hastings multiple occasions saying, but that's actually a very good example, because if you think about Netflix, you know, I don't believe that Reed's idea was, I'm going to be the biggest streamer in the world. His idea was very simple. I am going to license TV shows on mail order, right? Mail order, that was the business. All of a sudden, it started to morph. Well, investors were pushing back, saying, well, this doesn't make financial sense. This doesn't work. So what do? They say, let's try streaming. That'll be more effective, right? That's better for the bottom line. That started to work out really well. And then, I don't know if you remember, but Starz attempted, this is what they do to us, by the way. I'm not going to get into that. But Starz tried to sell a few shows to Netflix for, I think it was $150 million. And they sat down and said, well, $150 million for like 10 shows. I can just create or produce 10 shows or 5 shows. It just so happened that, and this, by the way, is very lucky. You have to be lucky, too. The shows that they produced, Orange is the New Black, House of Cards, it's very rare. I just want to make it clear for those of you that are good in statistics, you should check, fact check this. But it's highly unlikely for you to produce 5 shows and to get 5 hits. It's impossible, actually.
And yet somehow they
did it, right?
They had data on their side. That helped.
We can get into that too. There's no data back then. I mean, it's like they needed to produce shows. You know, someone had to come to you with an idea. You had to be able to afford it. But today the hit rate is about 7% for shows. So just think about that. But that morphed into, oh, wow, we're successful at producing. You know, investors get behind you, and all of a sudden you find yourself now as the largest producer of, you know, on-demand programming. But, you know, when you say data, I would be careful, because they also spend $17 billion a year, right? And then you hear, yeah, but we spent $100,000 on Squid Game, and that was our best show. And the question is, why did you spend the other $16 billion if you knew that this was the hit, right? So it's a very hard business, and it requires a lot of patience and flexibility. And so every company, if you look very closely, you'll see that companies that are successful, they often will, I don't want to call it a pivot, because sometimes it's just sort of a tweak in the model, right? Mail order became streaming, licensing content became producing. So you're going to see that. Spotify does that well. It was a music service that's now an audio company, right? They're selling books. So you see those types of transitions all the time.
So let's talk about the pivot that you made in Fubo. Because you started off with this grand ambition to be the ultimate sports streamer. And then you had to pivot along the way. There was some experimentation with gaming as well. What was the first iteration of Fubo and your pivot?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One is, when I realized that we would never have the full sports bundle because of the way major media companies license content, I had to convince 50 or 60 employees, not a good idea, very hard, mostly engineers, that, very opinionated, by the way. Did I mention that? Very hard job to do. And I had to convince them that, look, I know you guys, we said we were going to do sports, and we all believe in this, but we're also going to take on other content, non-sports content.
I know you came into this because of sports,
Yes.
but we're also doing something else.
And so that's when we pivoted and we said we were going to be a sports-first cable replacement service. And frankly, that is what everyone has been copying all along now. I always used to say, come for the sports, stay for the entertainment. What that really means is come for the sports is an acquisition funnel, right? Because you need to acquire, whatever business you're in, your acquisition costs are very important. So low acquisition cost is very important. So sports, because you know the format, right? If it's a soccer game, 90 minutes, you know the protagonist, Messi, Ronaldo, et cetera. You know the quality of the production, right? So all of this is known. So you don't really have to spend a lot of money. And so in 2018, when we got the World Cup, I think our acquisition costs were like $2. So we said, we're going to spend $4 or $5 million, $2. I'll do this all day long. And then what happened was the finals, and then we saw like a 90% churn event, right?
As soon as it was over.
Yeah, but investors will say, oh, your churn is horrible. No, because the reality is people came in to see the event. We delivered the service that they wanted. It just so happens we had no contracts. But so there's lots of these little learnings. So today, you won't see us market in the Olympics. It's a high churn event. Yes, in the first couple of days we will, just because we want people to know we have it. But we will not market any of these events.
But you'll be carrying the Olympics.
Yes, yes, we will be carrying the Olympics.
How did you do that? How did you go up against NBC, Comcast to do that?
Yeah, so the interesting thing is when all these engineers were telling me this is not why we're here, and I started telling them how we were going to actually access even more sports content, NBC content. But they said, how are we going to compete with Hulu? And that's the question that you have to answer as an entrepreneur is how do you compete with all of these really, I mean, we compete with, I think in the aggregate, maybe, keep me honest here, maybe $2 trillion of enterprise value across, if you think about Comcast is like a $250 billion company, and you know, Disney's about 180, and Google's Paramount, yeah, I mean, those are
Warner
a little
Brothers.
smaller now.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, these were very large companies that forced us to pay hundreds of millions of dollars of minimum guarantees. Don't ask me how I got through that. That's another story.
And you still have your hair.
Yes, a lot less hair, a little bit more gray than I was hoping at this age, but yes.
Sounds like a lot of stress.
So yes, but you know, for me, the most important thing was that it was the employees. I wanted to make sure, one, if I say something, we're going to deliver it. And you know, we had lots of very difficult moments because you have content owners that don't want you in the industry. Why? Because you have to. That means you're sharing with someone else, right? You're sharing with Netflix. You're sharing with Dish when satellite started, and so you know people really don't like to share. And then the other problem you have in media is that everyone is so competitive that they'll send each other press releases. We get a ton of press, more so than any other media company. And so I know those, you know, people call me and say, oh, your press releases were just handed out, or these news stories were handed out. And when they see something or some success, quickly we start to feel more pressure. Like they're calling, they're reviewing the website, they're looking at, you know, the feeds, or you manipulating my feed, or so this is probably the hardest business to be in because you're dealing with a very closed ecosystem that has, you know, a very serious, there's a moat here. There are most favored nations clauses. There's all these sort of, I call it price fixing, for lack of a better term. So it's a very difficult industry, and people have, you know, strong grasp of it.
Yeah.
And no one likes any new players coming, particularly after Netflix. So we had to deal with all of that pain. And the other issue was, I'm sure this is an issue that many of you will have, is fundraising. You know, thanks to Spotify, I couldn't raise 1 cent in California. One is they raised all the money out of California. And number two is when everyone saw the losses at Spotify, I could barely get in the door. They're like, no,
we're done.
Subscriber model, variable rates. You know, this type of model doesn't scale, right? Because it's not software. Because every time you get more customers, you're still paying a variable rate. The concept that I was trying to explain is the variable rate will come down, which Spotify has proven to be correct, but I think just the whole business in and of itself is very difficult, and investors find it very difficult to invest in that, knowing who you're competing with.
It required a leap of faith and perhaps more exposure
Yes.
to that particular business model more than they wanted to take on.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
For sure.
So
Not easy.
talk about what Fubo is right now, and I'm curious as to your thoughts on the landscape for sports streaming, because we know that a bunch of companies are teaming up to offer their own sports streaming service.
You're talking about the sports cartel?
Yes. You described it that way. For a while, they called it Spulu. We know that it was Fox, it was
Warner
Brothers, and Disney,
Yes.
saying they're going to come together to offer up a sports streaming service. And everyone in the media called it Spulu, like Sports Hulu, but the name of it is Venue. So talk a little bit about Fubo and where you were at when this news came along.
So we came up with this idea 10 years ago, and we've been blocked from doing this.
By the establishment.
By the establishment for a decade. And so when I hear a CEO go on CNBC or some other network and say, I have this great idea. We found a market for this service, and we're trying to engage consumers that are not interested in the bundle. And we're going to offer it, it's going to be highly competitive, and we're going to offer it at a much lower price.
You're like, sounds familiar.
Yeah, well, when they're your board members, when you're a private company, remember all these companies had invested in Fubo as well. So we had, I think one of our first investors, large investors, was both Sky and Fox were investors. James Murdoch was the initial investor. So this makes it a little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
But as you know, it's media, so it gets complicated.
And this is normal for media, right? To be like
There's a lot of
involved in each other.
sharp elbows everywhere, and it's not. Again, I mean, think about it. You have companies like Comcast, and Charter, and DirecTV. When have you seen any disruption? It's been 40 or 50 years. So you have to ask yourself, why is there no disruption, right? So I think with respect to this JV, the first thing that we were thinking was, one, this isn't fair, but again, this is startup world. Even though we're public, I still consider us a startup. Frankly, I think our market cap now is lower than our second to last private round. So where we only had 100,000, I think 150,000 subscribers and about, I want to say 250 million of revenue. Today, per our latest guidance, we're tracking to be about 1.6 billion of revenue. So, and those of you who are in media or want to do media, I can tell you, to do 1.6 billion of revenue in a year is a very hard thing to achieve. So again, a lot of these metrics, public market metrics, they don't make a lot of sense. But so this JV, once it came out, the news came out, the first thing we said was, one, it isn't fair, but that's life. And the second thing was, I sent an email to somebody saying, hey, that's great news. How can we help you? I did not expect a response, just so you guys know.
And when did anyone respond?
Of course not, because media companies know. Everyone sues each other all the time. We've never sued anyone for anything, by the way. Or we've never been sued, right? By media companies. By public investors, we've been sued, I think. Yeah, but we've won all our lawsuits. And so, I immediately, he didn't respond. I said, okay, this is what I was waiting for. And we immediately called a meeting. And obviously, it's very expensive to sue not one, but 3 media companies. And they're just engaged in anti-competitive behavior. Anytime you take that kind of market power, I mean, a 6-year-old, this is the funny thing about this whole thing. These are very smart people. So when you put this much concentration, it's a lot of concentration. 80%, the CFO of Disney came out and said, we will have 80% of the national sports rights. So to me, you're depriving consumers of choice, affordability, innovation, and you have been for a decade. So,
and now they're joining forces.
And now they're joining forces to do what? They want to knock out any players. By the way, I'm sure I'm not sure, I'm speculating, of course, but they see our numbers every quarter. We've exceeded guidance 12 of 13 quarters now. And we're overpaying by 30 to 50%. So this is actually a very good business under normal circumstances.
Didn't they never tried to reach out to you and acquire you?
I won't comment on that, but not recently, and nothing related to the JV. So nothing in the last, let's call it 24 months.
Okay.
Those specific groups.
Okay.
But you always have conversations that are ongoing. But I don't think, again, sharp elbows, a lot of egos. So we had no choice, but we feel good about it. We were told the chances are I think it was 0, but I don't believe that.
What was the response after you sued them?
Well, the lawsuit is on August 7th, I believe. Yes.
Or you had announced that you were going to sue them?
Yeah, we announced we were going to sue them sometime, I think, early March.
Okay.
I think they made their announcement February 15th-ish or 20th, and the stock obviously collapsed because people understand, that it's very difficult to compete with.
Yeah. How's Fubo going to compete against these 3 guys?
But that's what I have been doing. That's what the team has been doing. Again, this is all excluding the impact of the JV. But we have been fighting from the outset, and we've had to deal with numerous events. I'll give you one situation where we tried to acquire Sony. So PlayStation Vue, I don't know if you remember that product.
PlayStation Vue.
Yeah, Sony has a gaming console called PlayStation.
Yes.
And so in 2015, they also decided to enter the live TV streaming space with 60 million devices and an $80 billion market cap. Great. This is our first large competitor. Actually, it was Verizon Go 90 that acquired La Liga rights and gave it away for free, and then 2 years later, maybe a year later, it was gone. The point here is don't ever worry if there's a large company that you're facing. As a public company, I can tell you, it's very difficult to compete with a startup. Why?
So it's difficult for Sony to compete with you,
yes,
Fubo.
That's what happened. So they ended up shutting down their business. They wanted to sell it. We tried to buy it. And for some reason, in the last day, we made an agreement. They decided not to do it. I think they were just risk averse, as most Japanese companies are very risk averse, traditional companies. And so we didn't merge with them. Investors that were all expecting us to merge with them, for an added scale, all obviously were very nervous about the fact that we weren't merging, and they were thinking, okay, well, what's next for this little company? And then my CFO, who I'm still friends with, left.
Where did he go to?
He went to Comcast, and then that didn't last. I think it lasted a year. And then I helped him get another job somewhere else. But he left, and so you know what happens when your CFO leaves, right?
You have to talk to the investors yourself.
Well, that I did anyway. But the hard part was investors start thinking, well, why does the CFO leave? He or she doesn't believe in the business, doesn't make sense, don't have enough capital. So that's the problem when a CFO leaves. So we didn't get the deal done. We talked this deal up to all these investors. CFO leaves. This is a year and a half prior to going public. Okay? So now no investor wants to talk to us. And I'm faced with, we had some, I think I don't want to say cash out. We had a few cash out situations. I think I've had like 4 or 5, but I never get nervous. And so we had to tell, I think we had 80 or 90 employees at the time, because they were like, what's going on, what's going on? And it's hard. It's a room like this, you get in front of them and you say, look, we're going to pay your salary and you're all going to get paid bonuses. And they say, well, how can we get paid bonuses? You have no money. Because we told you you would always get paid. We're keeping, and by the way, at the time, some people didn't want to join our company because they'd rather work at Disney. And I can't tell you the number of layoffs. I always tell people, just because that company you think has been around for 100 years, that doesn't mean you're going to have a job there.
That company will still be there.
Yeah, they might be there, but they'll let go of 7,000 people, 5,000 people. And it turned out over that first 7 years, we never let go of anyone. And so it was very tough. I had to stand there and tell people, look, you're going to get paid. I give you my word. I'm going to keep pushing. Just do your jobs and don't worry. I'll handle it. And so, obviously tried to raise capital. At the time, COVID hit, and we're a sports service. And people are like, okay, this guy is running out of lives. I mean, I think somebody said he's like a cat. He's better than a cat. He has more than 9 lives. And so, I'm now looking at SPAC. This is before the whole SPAC craze. It was a year before the SPAC craze. And I went to see the heads of Goldman Sachs and like all these great banks. And they're looking at me and saying, never. You're never going to go public in your dreams.
There's no one playing live sports right now. There's
no live sports. You lose a lot of money. Yeah. You've got this variable business model. Yeah, great. So you're scaling your revenue and you're scaling your advertising business. And this is what I mean about being committed to your partners, to your employees, to your customers. I never stopped. In fact, there was a day where my co-founder from Drama Fever, also an economist, but he's a true like banker type guy, more conservative, said to me, hey, you got to go speak with the finance team and the legal team because, I don't want to say the chapter word, but chapter 11, 7, I know the difference between the two. That's not a good thing to know, by the way, the difference between the two. It means you're too close. And I said, well, why do you need me? I was actually annoyed for the first time in my life. Well, what do you mean? You got to kind of sit in on these meetings. I said, the lights are still on.
We're not there.
The air conditioning's pumping. Everything's good. You go, and all of you people go discuss this amongst yourselves. I'm still working. And so what I did was, crazy story. So I couldn't SPAC, so I found a company that was already public that had no money. They promised me money, but I knew the likelihood was probably not likely. And they had it was OTC traded. I don't even know what it did. It just had a lot of losses, that I remember. And a 50 million euro bond trading where it wasn't evident where the money went. So, but again, it's like we're getting into sort of February and March. Soccer, European soccer has shut down, right? A lot of the American sports leagues don't start till the fall, like college sports and all that. So we merged. It was a reverse triangular merger. And essentially, we gave away about 30% of the company, similar to a SPAC, but not really a SPAC. And then
SPAC-like maneuver.
Yeah, it was a SPAC-like maneuver. But again, that maneuver didn't do anything because you have no money. You're basically public. And then I have this now 50 million of debt trading in Frankfurt that I have to deal with. Long story, I dealt with it. That's a book in and of itself. But I had bankers telling me, you can't go public with this. I had 2 bankers and probably 4 law firms, and that they've done, so they said, hundreds of transactions. And they said it was impossible, that the SEC is going to review this. That's going to take a month after you file, and then there's going to be more questions. But I couldn't understand that because I just merged into an OTC company that's half public, right? And they already had, 700 investors or 600. We already had like 500 investors. And I couldn't understand why, they were explaining it to me. I'm like, I like napkin math. I'm a simple guy. I don't like it when people overcomplicate things because, it's an Excel sheet. It's all subjective. You can put whatever haircuts or variables that you want. This is why I always say you need to be flexible and committed and create optionality for yourself because you just don't know what's going to happen.
I want to go back to something you had said earlier, which is Sony was competing against you, was going to do something similar that you guys did. And
they did. Very similar.
Did, but this is something you come up against all the time.
Yes.
Big established companies with, it seems, deep, endless balance sheets doing the same thing you're doing, including the 3 companies that are coming up with Spulu/Venue. How do you not lose faith in that moment? Because these guys, they have endless resources. You're an upstart.
You sound like all the investors that I used to talk to. You're right. That's what they say.
Right, but it's a legitimate question, right?
Yes, it is.
So, but I mean, you were telling me earlier that this is something that you face time and again, and it's not something that stresses you out.
And it won't end. No, because I'm fully committed.
But beyond that, like you were telling me that as big publicly traded companies whose main business is something else, they see this as a little bit of a sideshow. sometimes, and they may not devote their most talented resources
Right.
to that task.
Yes. What usually, this is what I was trying to get at. First of all, just because there's a big Zoom and Cisco. Cisco has 150,000 engineers, and yet we all use Zoom, or most of us use Zoom. It's the same thing in media, is that someone has an idea, a top manager may have an idea, they're going to say, we're going to go after this space. 2 years from now, they don't get any results, and they're out. So you always have to remember that there's a chance that they won't be in that business. Now, Amazon has proven if they get in, they're in. I think there are only 2 times where they actually, I think they launched a phone, and they got out of that business very quickly. But usually, the tech guys will stay in that business. But everyone else, any other sort of area you're looking at, it's probably not going to happen. So the reason why I always felt comfortable is because I worked at Scripps, NBC, Telemundo, Charter. What happens is when there's a new idea, they want their best people on that. As do we. We always say we want our best people. Gaming, that happened. That was my fault. That was a big mistake. But there are also nuances there that really weren't a mistake yet. But what typically will happen is that they'll ask their best top performers to focus on this new project. If you're a top performer, do you really want to focus on a new project that has, there's limited interest in that product in the earliest stages? And if you fail, what happens? That means that you're not a good manager, or you don't know how to build things.
There's too much at stake.
There's too much risk.
Yeah.
There's no reward, and all risk. Because if you do a good job, they're going to say, yeah, but this person was a top performer anyway. Great. Put them on another, on another project. So, that's why I always say that what'll happen next is they'll just put a bunch of people on it that they're not crazy about, and those people will say, this is too hard. They'll run around going to marketing teams and product teams, and they can't get any resources, which I found out during my Sony diligence when, we flew 10 of our, different people in to just kind of talk about marketing, sort of different areas or functions of the business. They didn't know anything about their business. It was surprising because it was all shared resources.
They borrowed people from different teams.
They borrowed people from different teams. This is sort of a, this is annoying. I don't know why they asked me for this. The marketers didn't care. They're like, I have a Champions League budget that I have to sell gaming consoles. I don't care about this little business. And that business was doing about, I want to say at the time, about $100 million in revenue.
But that was your core business, so you cared about it tremendously.
Right. So if it's your core business, there's a high likelihood that you will do well. And there's a high likelihood that over time, big companies will give up. Now, the reason why they give up is because of the same situation I had with betting. When we got into betting, I made 2 mistakes. One, I didn't do it myself. So usually...
You partnered with someone?
No. So I had someone in the organization that my co-founder said, we should let this person run.
I see.
And they wanted to do this in Chicago. I'm like, listen, I'm uncomfortable with this. We should do it in New York. We need to be hands-on. We know what the culture is, how to start companies. We need to make sure people are engaged and excited, and they need to know that it's important to us, right? Because these are the things that you learn. Anyway, we did it in Chicago. We launched. It didn't go really well. As I was digging in, I was finding very simple things that people weren't doing. They didn't even think of doing. Oh, we can't find this person, this type of work that we need.
But if you had done the sports betting inside
when
New York,
we were there,
where you can keep an eye on things.
Because entrepreneurs are different. They're problem solvers, right? If you're just working in a company, most people 459, they're out. I'm serious. But when you look at the first 50 or 60 employees that you have, those people are hardcore. They love what they do. They love the company. They love the entrepreneurship. You don't micromanage them. And that 50 or 60 people, you'll see that if you look at our company, there are people that started as managers are now SVPs of public companies. So I'm not saying that everyone scales. Not some entrepreneurs don't scale. Not everyone in this room I would suggest to become a public CEO. I don't think a lot of people can do it. I don't even think a lot of people would want to do it if they knew exactly what you were dealing with. But on the betting piece, what happened was even when we launched, I was already getting a lot of pressure from investors. So we we would do our earnings call, we would have investor meetings, and then the pressure would begin. You get on a call with 10 or 12 investors. You know, they're listening to each other's questions. They're all smart, right? They're all sitting there taking notes. Why are you doing this? This isn't core. But remember, they're all there to make money for a quarter, for 6 months, or for a year. It's all about the bonus. And so they were applying so much pressure on me to stop working on betting because it was going to be costly.
It was a distraction, all of that.
I had to pull out. Now, if we were a private company, I probably would have kept going because that's how I am. I would have figured out a way to do it. If it didn't work, and by the way, we were live in New Jersey only 7 days. Can you imagine? You're live 7 days, and then the reports that come out, you know, Fubo shuts down betting business. As if we didn't even have a chance. I mean, we had just started. It wasn't pretty, I'll give you that. But again, those are things that you find out as you go. But the key is the culture. If you have the right culture, you can figure it out.
I want to thank you so much for joining us today, David.
Wonderful, great question.